So, solid and hazardous waste, and continuing our discussion of things that the EPA regulates and the government regulates. Of course, things that we want to prevent is contamination of land and water by hazardous and solid waste. Also to prevent inequitable exposure to risk, such as putting hazardous waste in places where people live. So this helps us to establish rules for how waste can be disposed of, where waste can be disposed of, safe ways for waste disposal. Of course, this also comes back to consumer education. Do consumers all know that they can't just throw batteries in the garbage, that they need to be taken care of and handled in a separate way? Do consumers know that they can't throw paint cans in the garbage, that they have to be disposed of in a very specific way? So I think that's some of the issue also with how we get hazard waste into places that can cause chemical issues. But the EPA then comes up with these rules and manages what the fines are for incorrect disposal of waste. Okay, so alternate policies. So how do we talk about ways that we can come up with policies? One is what falls under the category of command and control regulations. So command and control regulations have very specific rules that the government has set, such as this is the maximum amount of CO2 that factories can put into the air. If they exceed this amount, then they're going to pay fines. Okay. Advantages is that it's enforceable in the courts. If you violate a law, you can be fined, sanctioned for violating that law. Disadvantages are that not all rules are relevant to all types of businesses. We require a huge regulatory apparatus. So if we have all the rules we have that we want companies to follow, we need to have investigators available. So we have to maintain a robust staff of investigators that can police this stuff, or it might continue happening. The slowing down innovation, that can happen if companies are just doing compliance. If I just have to comply to the letter of the law, there's no reason to innovate and find ways to do it even better than the law requires. Fines can be cheaper than compliance. So I know I saw an article a few weeks ago about companies that were dumping in California. They were illegally dumping because the fines were cheaper than the cost of proper disposal. And they decided that they would rather pay the fines than pay for the disposal costs. So the regulatory thing isn't really working then when fines are cheaper than compliance. Okay. So market-based, with market-based rules, we get that the market controls through either what people will and won't purchase. So when people start boycotting businesses for environmental reasons, when people start buying more sustainable products or products that are labeled safer for the environment, companies tend to create more of those things because that's what consumers are demanding. That's a possibility of a market-based policy. Another one is a cap and trade. So we might say you can only expend so much CO2 in a year, and but will allow businesses near you to trade. So if you have a business sitting beside you that doesn't use that much CO2 and you know you're going to go over your cap, that business that isn't going to go over their cap or just has less of an environmental footprint is willing to sell you their extra capacity or negotiate some kind of process. Taxes, tax incentives, government incentives, such as governments giving you money back for putting in solar and wind energy. Those are things that can happen. Usually those government incentives change from year to year. So Congress sets tax policies, and because Congress can change tax policies, then those incentives that you can get from the government for different types of energy can change from year to year also. Okay, so we gave some examples of these. So we can either tax bad behavior or good behavior. We can give tax breaks too. We have cap and trade systems where we can trade if we're going to go over. Okay, other alternate policies are information disclosure. So this can be regulation by embarrassment. So if a company is doing something wrong, we're going to expose it and tell the world about it. Okay, this is one of the things that happened to Nike in the early 2000s. So in 2003, a documentary was made about Nike called Beyond the Swoosh that exposed Nike's horrible factory conditions, and that they were dependent on sweatshop labor. That while they were giving athletes $1 million contracts and selling shoes for $100 to $125 a pair, the people in their factories were getting paid $1.25 an hour, $1.25 a day, not an hour, a day, and living in horrible conditions. So all of this was made public. So they made documentaries, they went on college campuses, they told college students started boycotting Nike, they started calling for their campuses to end contracts with Nike, and Nike made changes. They said, don't boycott us, don't get rid of your college agreements with us. We will make the changes you're asking us to make. Just give us a chance to do better. Okay. We have civil and criminal enforcement. So we already looked at the case of Volkswagen, where they paid significant fines to the U.S. government, charged for criminally for causing their Dieselgate issue. So by tricking people into buying cars that they thought were safe for the environment, people who were purchasing them and the U.S. government thought they were safe for the environment. So that's just one example. You think about BP Oil, who had a spill in the Gulf of Mexico that caused a significant amount of environmental damage and also killed several people. Well, then it was also found out that they weren't following regulations, that one of the reasons that it happened was because they were violating standards. So then they faced significant penalties and wrongdoing. Hey, government incentives that I talked about. This encourages companies to do things for tax breaks or cash back from governments, creating information. So companies often do disclose the way that they are trying to reduce their carbon footprints, trying to be better stewards of natural resources. This, of course, with information disclosure, this can also drive consumer behavior. Okay, and we talked a little bit about civil and criminal enforcement also. So what are costs and benefits of regulations? Okay, so we have environmental regulations have led to the loss of jobs in some industries, but stimulated other sectors. Not necessarily this is just a changing thing. So you look at changing economies. where we have, the U.S. is no longer an industrial-based economy. We were 100 years ago an industrial-based economy, and now we are more what's called a knowledge-based economy and a service-based economy, where we have technological innovation, we use our brains more, and then we have a high service-based economy. But there are other countries that are going through that peak industrial thing that we went through hundreds of years ago. But you look at, there aren't a lot of coal mining jobs in the U.S. anymore, as we've gone to different types of cleaner energy. So this is, before, we never had college programs. So 40 years ago, there was no college program for wind energy at any of the schools in Iowa. And now every single community college in Iowa has a program for maintaining wind energy devices. So again, electric vehicles, we never built electronic vehicles 30, 40 years ago. This is new jobs. So the jobs, we've lost some jobs, we've created new jobs, or the jobs change. And as long as people are willing to become skilled in different areas, those jobs can still be maintained as we change skill sets and learn new things. Okay, so just costs and benefits of regulation. When we look at different benefits, so we stop polluting, then we have air and water quality improvements. We have less toxic waste, less danger. You're going to see in some of the future chapters, particularly like the fashion chapter is one, when we get into the fashion, into some of the industry specific, there is a lot of very, very damaging waste from the fashion industry. And the people who are greatly impacted by that, and what are some of the solutions. We don't have that impact anymore because so much of industry no longer happens here. But if you look at the history of the United States, we were a much dirtier country. We had less air quality, we had, less water quality. And as science improves, our quality of life improves, people live longer, people have less disease. Okay, so how do we manage sustainability? Most firms go beyond compliance, and they go beyond compliance for a variety of reasons. One, they're cost-saving measures. So, for example, wind energy can not only save a company money, but it can be a way to generate revenue, because the energy company buys any excess energy you make with wind. Now, a downside of that is not every place can have wind energy. I remember when I was an undergrad, the college that I went to, I was on the student senate, and the college that I went to desperately wanted to build a windmill, but they kept failing the windmill test. And it was disappointing because other colleges they knew of that had built windmills were making really great money off of the energy revenue they were selling to the electronic companies, which then they were able to put back into student programming and student programs. So, as I said, not everyone can take, solar energy, the same thing. It isn't designed for every location. So you have to think about, how can I improve standards? Maybe one of my standards is just less waste. Okay. So we go from pollution prevention to we're just focused on minimizing waste before it's created, to we're really thinking about how our products impact the environment, both when we're making them and after they've left our factory. And that's where we get into, the whose responsibility is it? Is it the corporation's responsibility to make sure that a product is clean, is environmentally responsible, is sustainable, or is it the consumers, or is it the governments, or is it a combination of the three? Because what happens to a product and what happens to a product packaging after the company sells it? They have little control over that. They can create incentive programs, though, like if you return it, we'll give you money back. If you recycle it, you can get money back. Different things like that. For if I return it, I might get a discount on a new item. And there are programs that do that. And then clean technology, where we develop innovative new technologies that support sustainability. Everything from keeping our products out of landfills to creating new energy models to coming up with less resource intensive processes. Okay, so what is the ideal? So what's the absolute standard against which we get measured? So we do have some companies that create measurement standards about, how do we measure sustainability? How do we measure whether or not you're being the most sustainable company? Okay, and one of the ways that companies share that they're being sustainable is through reporting. They can either create separate reports that are talking about what their social and environmental impact are, or they can do integrated reporting where when they report their financial results out to shareholders, which they're legally required to do, they also include environmental and social impacts. A lot of companies do this integrated reporting. Some companies have a separate corporate social sustainability report. Okay. Other things we can do are draw on partnerships. So this example here about a partnership between Starbucks and Conservation International. So we can work with different partners to improve environmental quality or conserve resources. So for example, Starbucks has an incentive to work with people who are trying to conserve the earth. Starbucks' main product is coffee. Coffee is one of the agricultural products that is in great danger. Coffee has very, very specific growing requirements. It works best in a rainforest. It can only be grown in about a 10-degree temperature window. There can't be big temperature changes between the tree. It takes a long time to grow. It can't get too much sun. It's a very volatile crop. And because of that, Starbucks, as coffee is its number one product, is incentivized to help protect that crop, to help improve agricultural processes for coffee growing, to help improve how coffee growers do what they do in order to help improve their product and create sustainability against their business. Starbucks won't exist in 20 years if coffee doesn't exist in 20 years. Okay, it creates competitive advantage. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways that a company can create competitive advantage. Really what competitive advantage is how do we compare with our competitors? What makes a consumer, so someone like us, buy one product over another? Do we, one thing is brand differentiation. I might be more inclined to buy a product that says it's safer for the environment when I'm looking at a selection of 4 or 5 products. Okay. It also saves money. If I'm saving money, I am making more profit. Okay. Less liability risk. If I'm not in trouble with the government, I'm not going to be paying fines. I'm not going to be getting sued. I'm not going to have to worry about liability issues So we look at some of these corporate leaders in sustainability here. So we see the very top is Unilever. Unilever is a major corporation that owns products like Dove and Ben & Jerry's, Lipton. So you can see they have a pretty diverse product line. So they're considered one of the great leaders in sustainability, that they put in a lot of efforts. Patagonia has a very high sustainability. One of the reasons that Patagonia is so focused on sustainability also goes with their product line, much like Starbucks, which we were talking about. Patagonia creates products for outdoor activities, camping, hiking, being outdoors. And so, as they say, they want to protect the outdoors as part of this competitive advantage. My products are for the outdoors. I love the outdoors, and therefore I want to sustain the outdoors. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's, they're owned by the same corporation, owned by the same person, Johnny Morris. If you ever want to look for, he's very, very dedicated to sustainability. Sustainability of land. He owns several state parks. He owns several waterways that he protects. He is into hunting and fishing. And he says you can't hunt and fish if there are no animals and no forests and no rivers. And if we don't take care of those, then those hobbies go away. So he has a huge investment as part of being an owner of Bass Pro and Cabela's. He does a huge investment in environmental protections and conservation of waterways, so that fish are still available to be fished and animals are still available to be hunted and lands are protected and available for people to use and enjoy. Okay, so that is the end of our sustainability week. And next week we will be talking about government policies. So next week there will be some political discussion in the discussion boards. I've already put a disclaimer to please keep it civil. We're in a very hostile political environment right now. I just ask that we find ways to share our thoughts with each other without getting volatile and fighting with each other.